story time. And it's August. So today we're going to read a beautiful story, and it's going to come from Jocelyn's collection of fairy tales from Hans Christian Andersen, and it's the MinaLima. Yes, it is the MinaLima edition. So there's a little, in each story, there's extra little tidbits that are really cute. So in here, today's story that we're going to highlight is Thumbelina. Thumbelina. Upon the green velvet statins sat a very delicate and graceful little maiden, Thumbelina. So let us begin. There once was a woman who wished very much to have a little child, and at last she went to a fairy and said, "I should so very much like to have a little child. Can you tell me where I can find one?" "Oh, that can be easily managed," said the fairy. "Here is a grain of barley, different from the grain that grows in the fields and feeds the chickens. Plant it in a flower pot and see what will happen." "Thank you," said the woman, and she gave the fairy 12 pennies. Then she went home and planted the barley corn, and immediately there grew a large, handsome flower, something like a tulip, but with its leaves tightly closed, as if it were still a bulb. "It is a beautiful flower," said the woman, and she kissed the red and golden colored leaves. While she kissed the flower, it opened, and she can see that it was a real tulip, Jocelyn. Within the flower, upon the green velvet statins, sat a very delicate and graceful little maiden. She was scarcely half as long as a thumb, so she was named Thumbelina, because she was so small, smaller even than Jocelyn. A walnut shell, elegantly polished, served her for a cradle. Her mattress was made of blue violet leaves, with a rose leaf for a counterpane. Here she slept at night, but during the day she amused herself on a table where the woman had placed a plate full of water. Round this plate were flowers with their stems in the water, and upon it floated a large tulip petal, which served Thumbelina for a boat. Here the little girl sat and rowed herself from side to side with 2 oars made of white horsehair. It really was a very pretty sight. Thumbelina could sing so softly and sweetly that nothing so sweet had ever been heard. Now, Jocelyn has this really sweet flower thing that I can turn. I'll show you. It's right here. Ooh. Goes from flower, and then it goes, and there's little Thumbelina. Isn't that pretty? One night, while she laid in her pretty bed, a large, ugly, wet toad crept through a broken pane of glass in the window and leaped right upon the table where Thumbelina lay sleeping under her rose leaf quilt. "What a pretty little wife this would make for my son," said the toad, and she took up the walnut shell in which little Thumbelina lay asleep and jumped through the window with it into the garden. In the swampy margin of a broad stream in the garden lived the toad with her son. He was uglier even than his mother, and when he saw the pretty little maiden in her elegant bed, he could only cry, "Cluck, cluck, buck-cuck-cuck-cucks." "Don't speak so loud or she will awake," said the toad. "And then she might run away, for she is as light as a swan's down. She will place her on one of the water lily leaves out in the stream. It will be like an island to her. She is so light and small, and then she cannot escape. And while she is away, we will make haste and prepare the stateroom under the marsh, in which you are to live when you are married." Far out in the stream grew a number of water lilies with broad green leaves which seemed to float on top of the water. The largest of these leaves appeared further off than the rest, and the old toad swam out to it with the walnut shell in which little Thumbelina laid still asleep. Here you can see the toad and little Thumbelina and the walnut shell. That's the mother toad. And then you could see where they put the walnut shell on the pond on top of the lily pad. No, we must not allow that. The little girl woke very early in the morning and began to cry bitterly when she found out where she was, for she could see nothing but water on every side of the large green leaf and no way of reaching the land. Meanwhile, the old toad was very busy under the marsh, decking her room with rushes and yellow wildflowers to make it look pretty for her new daughter-in-law. Then she swam out with her ugly son to the leaf on which she had placed poor little Thumbelina, Jocelyn. She wanted to fetch the pretty bed to put it in the bridal chamber for her. The old toad bowed low to her in the water and said, "Here is my son. He will be your husband, and you will live happily together in the marsh by the stream." "Cox, cox, buckacox," was all her son could say for himself. So the toad took up the elegant little bed and swam away with it, leaving Thumbelina all alone on the green leaf, where she sat and she wept. Jocelyn, she could not bear to think of living with the old toad and having her ugly son for a husband. The little fishes who swam about in the water beneath had seen the toad and had heard what she had said, so they lifted their heads above the water to look at the little maiden. They saw that she was very pretty, and it made them sorry to think that she must go and live with ugly toads. "No," the fish says, "we must not allow that." So they assembled in the water round the green stalk which held the leaf on which the little maiden stood, and gnawed it away at the root with their teeth. Then the leaf floated down the stream, carrying Thumbelina far away out of reach of land, Jocelyn. Thumbelina sailed past many towns, and the little birds in the bushes saw her and sang, "What a lovely little creature." So the leaf swam away with her further and further until it brought her to other lands. A graceful white butterfly constantly fluttered around her, and at last alighted on the leaf. Thumbelina pleased him, and she was glad of it, for now the toad could not possibly reach her, and the country through which she sailed was beautiful, and the sun shone upon the water till it glittered like liquid gold. I know. Where do you think she's going? We'll find out, Jocelyn. She took off for a girdle and tied one end of it around the butterfly, and the other end of the ribbon she fastened to the leaf, which now guided on much faster than ever, taking little Thumbelina with it as she stood. Presently a large June bug flew by. The moment he caught sight of her, he seized her round her delicate waist with his claws and flew with her into a tree. The green leaf floated away on the brook, and the butterfly flew with it, for he was fastened to it and could not get away. Oh, how frightened little Thumbelina felt when the June bug flew with her to the tree. You could see her flying right there on the little lily pad with the butterfly. to different lands. The beautiful white thumb butterfly floated away with the leaf, but the June bug did not trouble himself at all about that. He seated himself by her side on a large green leaf, gave her some honey from the flowers to eat, and told her that she was very pretty, though not in the least like a June bug. After a time, all the June bugs who lived in the tree came to visit her. They stared at Thumbelina, and then the young lady June bugs turned up their fillers and said, "She only has 2 legs. How ugly that looks." "She has no fillers," said another. "Her waist is quite slim." "Pooh! She is like a human being." "Oh, she is ugly," said all the lady June bugs, although Thumbelina was very pretty. Then the June bug who had run away with her believed all the others when they said that she was ugly and would have nothing more to say to her, and told her that she might go where she liked. He flew down with her from the tree and placed her on a daisy, where she cried because she was so ugly that even the June bugs would have nothing to do with her. There she is on the daisy with the June bug. And yet she was really the loveliest creature that one could imagine, and as tender and delicate as a beautiful rose leaf, just like you, Jocelyn. Yes. God makes beautiful things. Poor little Thumbelina lived quite alone in the wild forest all that summer. She wove herself a bed with blades of grass and hung it under a broad leaf to protect herself from the rain. She sucked the honey from the flowers for food and drank the dew from her leaves every morning. So the summer and the autumn passed away, and then came the winter. The long and cold winter. All the birds who had sung to her so sweetly flew away, and the trees and the flowers were wilted. The large clover leaf under which she had lived had shriveled up and left nothing but a dry yellow stalk. She shivered with cold, for her clothes were worn out. It began to snow, and each flake, Jocelyn, was like a whole shovelful falling upon one of us. For we are large, but she was only an inch height. Then she wrapped herself up in a dry leaf, but that cracked in the middle and did not keep her warm, and she shook with cold. Near the wood in which she had been living lay a large cornfield, but the corn had been cut a long time ago, and nothing remained but the bare, dry stubble standing up out of the frozen ground. It was like a large wood to her. Oh, how she shivered with the cold. She came at last to the door of a field mouse who had a little home under a corn stubble. The field mouse lived warm and comfortable there, with a whole room full of corn and a kitchen and a beautiful dining room. Poor little Thumbelina stood before the door like a little beggar girl and begged for a small piece of barley corn, for she had been without a morsel to eat for 2 long days. "You poor little creature," said the field mouse, who was a really good old field mouse. "Come into my warm room and dine with me." She was so pleased with Thumbelina that she said, "You are quite welcome to stay with me all winter, if you like, but you must keep my rooms clean and neat and tell me stories if I like them very much." Isn't that sweet? So here we go. It's Thumbelina and the little field mouse. So Thumbelina did all the field mouse desired and was very comfortable on the whole. One day the field mouse said, "We shall have a visitor soon, Jocelyn. My neighbor pays me a visit once a week. He is better off than I am. He has large rooms and wears a beautiful black velvet coat. I wonder what that is. If you can only have him for a husband, you would be well provided for indeed. But he is blind, so you must tell him the prettiest stories you know. But Thumbelina did not feel at all interested in this neighbor, for he was a mole. However, he was a mole. However, he came and paid his visit dressed in his black velvet coat. He is very rich and learned, and his house is 20 times larger than mine, said the field mouse. He was rich and learned, no doubt, but he always spoke strangely of the sun and the pretty flowers because he had never seen them. Thumbelina was obliged to sing to him. Lady bird, fly away home, and many other pretty songs. And the mole fell in love with her sweet voice. A short time before, he had dug a long passage under the earth, which led from the dwelling of the field mouse to his own house. And the field mouse and Thumbelina had permission to walk whenever they liked. He warned them not to be afraid of the dead bird that laid in the passage. The mole took a piece of philosopherant wood in his mouth. He shone it like fire in the dark, and he led them through the long, dark passage. There's the mole in the black velvet coat. When they came to the spot where the dead bird laid, the mole pushed his broad nose through the ceiling so as to make a large hole through which the daylight shone into the passage. In the middle of the floor lay a dead swallow, his beautiful wings folded close to his sides, Jocelyn, his feet and his head drawn up under his feathers. It made little Thumbelina very sad to see it. She so loved the little birds who had sung and tweeted to her so beautifully all summer. But the mole pushed it aside with his crooked legs, and he said, "He will sing no more now. How miserable it must be to be born a little bird. I am thankful that none of my children will ever be birds." I know, Jocelyn. Yes, explained the field mouse. What is the use of this twiddling? For when winter comes, he must either starve or be frozen to death. Still, birds are very high bred. Thumbelina said nothing. But when the two others had turned their backs on the bird, she stooped down and stroked the soft feathers of his head and kissed the closed eyelids. And there is the little path they took, where the dead bird's in the middle, towards the mole's house, from the mouse's house. Perhaps this was the very one who sang to me so sweetly in the summer, she said. And how much pleasure you gave me, you dear pretty bird. The mole now stopped up the hole through which the daylight shone and led the ladies home again. But darling, the night Thumbelina could not sleep, so she got out of bed and wove a large, beautiful rug of hay. She carried it to the dead bird and spread it over him, which some down from the flowers which she had found in the field mouse's room. It was as soft as wool, and she spread some of it on each side of the bird so that he might lie warmly in the cold earth. "Farewell, pretty bird," she said. "Farewell, and thank you for your sweet singing through the summer." When all the trees were green and the warm sun shone upon us, then she laid down her head on the bird's breast, and she was startled, for it seemed as if something inside the bird went thump, thump. It was the bird's heart. He really was not dead, only numbed with the cold, and the warmth was restoring him to life. Ah. In autumn, all the swallows fly away to warm countries, but if one happens to linger, the cold seizes it. It falls and remains where it fell until the cold snow covers it. Thumbelina trembled. She was quite frightened, for the bird was large, a great deal larger than herself. and she was only an inch high. But she took courage and laid the wool more thickly over the poor swallow, and then brought a leaf which she had used for her own counterpane and laid it over the head of the poor bird. And this is the rug that she was making of hay. The next night, she again stole out to see him. He was alive, but very weak. He could only open his eyes, Jocelyn, for a moment to look at Thumbelina, who stood holding a piece of phosphorescent wood in her hand, for she had no lantern. "Thank you, pretty child," said the sick swallow. "I have been so nicely warmed that I shall strong again and able to fly about in the warm sunshine." "Oh," she said, "it is cold outdoors now. It snows and freezes. Stay in your warm bed, and I will take care of you." She brought the swallow some water in a flower leaf, and after he had drunk it, he told her that he had wounded one of his wings in a thorn bush and could not fly as fast as the others, who had soon fled away on their journey to warm countries, Jocelyn. At last he had fallen and could remember no more, nor how he came where she had found him. The whole winter the swallow remained underground, and Thumbelina nursed him with care and with love. Neither the moor nor the field mouse knew anything about it, Jocelyn, for they did not like swallows. The spring came and the sun warmed the earth. Then the swallow bade farewell to Thumbelina, and she opened the hole which the mole had made in the ceiling. The sun shone in upon them so beautifully, Jocelyn, that the swallow asked her if she would go with him. She could sit on his back, he said, and he would fly away with her into the green woods. But Thumbelina knew it would make the field mouse sad if she left her that way, so she said, "No, I cannot." "Farewell, then, farewell, you good, pretty little girl," said the swallow, and flew out into the sunshine. Thumbelina looked after him, and the tears rose in her eyes, for she was just very fond of that swallow bird. "Tweet, tweet," sang the bird, flying out into the green woods. Thumbelina felt very sad. She was not allowed to go out into the warm sunshine, Jocelyn. The corn which had been sown in the field over the house of the field mouse had grown high into the air, and it was a thick wood to Thumbelina, who was only an inch high. And there is the swallow bird flying away into the green woods. "You are going to be married, Thumbelina," said the field mouse. "My neighbor has asked for you. What good fortune for a poor child like you. Now we will make your wedding clothes. They must be woolen and linen. Nothing must be wanting. You are the mole's wife." Thumbelina had to turn the spinning wheel, and the field mouse hired 4 spiders, who were weave day and night. Every evening the mole visited her, and was always speaking of the time when the summer would be over. Then he would keep his wedding day with Thumbelina, but now the heat of the sun was so great that it burned the earth and made it quite hard like a stone. As soon as the summer was over, the wedding should take place. But Thumbelina was not happy, for she did not like the tiresome mole, Jocelyn. Every morning when the sun rose and every evening when it went down, she would creep out the door, and as the wind blew aside the leaves of the corn so that she could see the blue sky, she thought how beautiful and bright it seemed out there, and wished so much to see her dear swallow again. When autumn arrived, Thumbelina's outfit was ready, and the field mouse said, "In 4 weeks, the wedding will take place." Then Thumbelina cried and said she did not want to marry the tiresome mole. "Nonsense," replied the field mouse. "Don't be foolish. He is a very handsome mole. The queen herself does not wear the more beautiful velvets and furs. His kitchens and cellars are quite full. You ought to be thankful for such good fortune." So the wedding day was fixed, and the mole was to take Thumbelina to live with him deep under the earth and never again to see the warm sun, because he did not like it. The field mouse had given her permission to stand at the door before she left. "Farewell, bright sun," she cried, stretching out her arm towards it. And she walked a short distance from the house, for the corn had been cut and only a dry stubble was left in the fields. "Farewell, farewell," she repeated, twining her arm round a little red flower. "Greet the little swallow for me, if you should see him again." Tweet, tweet, sounded over her head. She looked up, and there was the swallow himself, flying close by. As soon as he spied Thumbelina, he was delighted. She told him that she was to marry the ugly mole, and how unhappy she felt that she must live always beneath the earth and never to see the bright sun any more, Jocelyn. And as she told him, she wept. "Cold winter is coming," said the swallow, "and I am going to fly away into warmer countries. Will you go with me? You can sit on my back and fasten yourself on with your sash. Then we can fly away from the ugly mole in his gloomy house, far away over the mountains to warm countries where the sun shines more brightly than here, where it is always summer and the flowers are always in bloom. Fly now with me, dear little Thumbelina, you who saved my life when I laid frozen in that dark, dreary passage." "Yes, yes, I will go with you," said Thumbelina. She seated herself on the bird's back with her feet on his outstretched wings and tied her girdle to one of his strongest feathers. Then the swallow rose in the air and flew over forest and over sea, high above the highest mountains, covered with snow that never melts. Thumbelina would have been frozen in the cold air, but she crept under the bird's warm feathers, keeping her little head uncovered, Jocelyn, so that she might admire the beautiful lands over which they passed. At length they reached the warm countries where the sun shines more brightly and the sky seems more high above the earth. Here on the edges and by the wayside grew purple, green, and white grapes, and lemons and oranges hung from the trees in the woods. The air was fragrant with myrtles and orange blossoms. Beautiful children ran along the country lanes, playing with gay butterflies, and as the swallow flew further and further, every place appeared still more lovely. At last they came to a blue lake, and by the side of it, shaded by trees of the deepest green, stood a palace of dazzling white marble, built in ancient times. Ooh, Jocelyn. Vines clustered round its lovely pillars, and at the top were many swallows' nests. One of these was the home of the swallow who carried Thumbelina. And here we go. There's the palace and the swallow heading towards it. "This is my house," said the swallow, "but you would not be comfortable in it. Choose one of these lovely flowers, and I will put you down upon it. Then you shall have everything that you could wish to make you happy." "That will be delightful," said Thumbelina, clapping her little hands. A marble pillar had fallen to the ground and laid there broken into 3 pieces. Between these pieces grew the most beautiful large white flowers. The swallow flew down with Thumbelina and placed her on one of the broad leaves. How astonished she was to see, in the middle of the flower, a tiny little man, as white and transparent as if he had been made of crystal. He had a gold crown on his head and delicate wings at his shoulders, and was not much larger than Thumbelina herself. He was the angel of the flower, for a tiny man or a tiny woman dwells in every flower, and this was the king of them all. "Oh, How beautiful he is, whispered Thumbelina to the swallow. The little prince was at first quite frightened at the bird, who was like a giant compared to such a delicate little creature as himself. But when he saw Thumbelina, he was delighted. She was the prettiest little maid he had ever seen. He took the gold crown from his head and placed it on hers and asked her name, and if she would be his queen of all the flowers. So she said yes to the handsome prince. Then all the flowers opened, and out of each came a little lady or a little tiny lord, all so pretty that it was a pleasure to look at them. Jocelyn, each of them brought Thumbelina a present. The best gift was a pair of beautiful wings, which had belonged to a large white fly. They were fastened to Thumbelina's shoulders so that she might fly from flower to flower. Then there was much rejoicing, and the little swallow who sat above them in his nest was asked to sing a wedding song, which he did as well as he could, but in his heart he felt sad, for he was very fond of Thumbelina and would have liked to never to part from her again. You must not be called Thumbelina any more, said the spirit of the flowers to her. It is an ugly name, and you are so very pretty. We will call you May. Farewell, farewell, said Swallow as he left the warm countries to fly back into Denmark. There he had a nest over the window of a house in which dwelt the man who wrote this story. The swallow sang tweet, tweet. From his song came the whole story. And here is where all the flowers opened. And you see all the little tiny lords and ladies, and they're making Thumbelina her wings, or as you now call her, May. And that is the end of the story of Thumbelina. I hope y'all enjoyed it, and I hope you stuck with it. It was a pretty story, and I really like that one, and Jocelyn loves that one too because it talks about somebody little just like she is. So next week and the week after, we'll be reading some Raggedy Ann stories. So Jocelyn and I are going to bring our Raggedy Ann dolls, and I also will bring mine. And mine is a very old one. So we will see you next week for that. And a little heads up, starting in September, we're going to be reading Little House on the Prairie. We're so excited about that. Yes, we are. So I hope y'all will join us for that. We're going to do some very special things with those videos when we split the book up in chapters. And I decided to do in September because we have 5 Fridays, so we'll be able to split it up pretty well. And I hope y'all will join us for the reading of Little House on the Prairie. So we'll see you later, and God bless, and enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye.